It is 3:47 in the morning over Novorossiysk. The Black Sea wind is dragging smoke across the Shishkari's terminal. Air defense crews on the eastern mole are firing into the dark at shapes they cannot see clearly. And in the inner harbor, behind two layers of booms, behind the netting, behind the supposedly impenetrable concentric ring of Pantsir batteries that Moscow spent 18 months reinforcing, the frigate Admiral Essen is burning. A Project 1239 small missile hovercraft, one of the most exotic platforms left in the Russian inventory, is taking water beside her. And somewhere in a fortified bunker on the Krasnodar coast, the staff of what remains of Russia's Black Sea Fleet are not reading after-action reports. They are doing something far more dangerous for a military command. They are not answering. This is not a story about one frigate. This is not a story about a single overnight raid on May 23rd. What you are witnessing is the operational paralysis of an entire fleet headquarters in real time on the only stretch of coastline Russia has left. Let me be precise, because precision is what this moment deserves. The Russian Black Sea Fleet, the heir to a 240-year tradition stretching back to Catherine the Great, has been driven out of Sevastopol. It has been driven out of Crimea. It has been driven out of the western Black Sea entirely. And now, at Novorossiysk, the last fully functional naval base it possesses on the entire Black Sea coast, it cannot protect its own flagship-class surface combatants from a country that, by every pre-war assumption, was not supposed to have a navy at all. Pull the lens back, because what looks like a drone raid is actually the closing chapter of a 4-year doctrinal collapse. And the real question is not whether the Admiral Essen will be repaired. The real question is whether Russian naval doctrine as a coherent system still exists in the Black Sea. My professional judgment after decades watching how navies fight and how navies break is that it does not. Now let me walk you through what this actually means at the strategic level. To understand why this strike is a verdict and not an incident, we have to rewind. We have to go back to February of 2022, when the assumptions that built the modern Russian Black Sea Fleet were still considered serious by serious people in serious capitals. On paper, the fleet was formidable. The flagship, the missile cruiser Moskva, a Slava-class behemoth, 12,500 tons, designed to kill American carriers, anchored a force of roughly 24 surface combatants, 6 Kilo-class submarines, landing ships, missile corvettes, and a logistical tail that had been modernized aggressively after the 2014 annexation of Crimea. Sevastopol itself was treated as untouchable. The base was protected by S-400 systems, by Panzer point defense, by coastal anti-ship batteries, by electronic warfare regiments, and by the simple geographic assumption that Ukraine, without a fleet of its own, without long-range strike weapons, without naval aviation, could not reach it. That assumption was not stupid in 2022. It was conventional. Western navies shared it. NATO planners shared it. The Russian General Staff shared it most of all. And that is the first lesson of this war that nobody in Moscow has been willing to absorb. The most dangerous assumptions in military history are not the ones held by fools. They are the ones held by professionals. Because professionals defend their assumptions with infrastructure, with budgets, with careers, and with doctrine, which means when those assumptions fail, they fail catastrophically, and they fail across the entire system at once. On the 13th of April, 2022, 2 Ukrainian-built R-360 Neptune anti-ship missiles, a weapon Moscow had publicly dismissed as a paper threat, struck the Moskva. She burned through the night. She sank under tow the next morning. And for the first time since the Russo-Japanese War of 1905, a Russian flagship had been put on the bottom by an enemy. That should have been the moment Russian naval doctrine in the Black Sea was rewritten from the keel up. It was not. Instead, Moscow named the frigate Admiral Makarov as the de facto new flagship, declared the Moskva an isolated tragedy caused by a fire, and proceeded as if nothing structural had changed. And it gets even more serious from here, because what followed was not the recovery of a wounded fleet. What followed was its progressive eviction from its own home waters. Let me give you the chronology, because the chronology is the argument. By the autumn of 2022, Ukrainian uncrewed surface vessels, the Magura 5L5, then later the V6 and the missile-armed V7, began arriving in Sevastopol harbor in swarms. The first attacks were dismissed as stunts. By 2023, the Sergei Kotov, the Ivanovets, the Cesar Kunikov, the Caesar landing ship, one by one on the bottom. By the end of 2023, The Russian naval headquarters building in Sevastopol had been gutted by a Storm Shadow cruise missile strike. By 2024, the Fleet Command had quietly relocated. By 2025, the bulk of operational vessels had been pulled out of Crimea altogether and concentrated at Novorossiysk on the Russian mainland coast, a port that was never designed to be a fleet base, that has no dry dock capable of major repairs to a frigate-sized hull, and that sits at the eastern end of the Black Sea, hundreds of nautical miles from where a Black Sea fleet is supposed to be able to project power. According to Ukraine's Ministry of Defense assessment published in early 2026, approximately 30% of the combat strength of the Black Sea Fleet has been destroyed or seriously damaged. According to the Carnegie analysis published in April, Novorossiysk is now the only fully functional Russian naval base in the Black Sea. According to Ukraine's military intelligence chief, Kirilo Budanov, domestically produced sea drones have, in his exact words, paralyzed Russia's Black Sea Fleet. Let that sink in for a moment. The senior intelligence official of the country Russia invaded is publicly describing the fleet that was supposed to dominate that country's coastline as paralyzed. And nobody in serious naval circles is correcting him. This is the moment to be honest about what mainstream framing keeps missing. The Western press has for 4 years told the story of the Black Sea War as a sequence of dramatic incidents. Moskva sunk, Sevastopol struck, drones in the harbor, oil terminal on fire. Each incident treated as a one-off. Each incident followed by analysts asking whether Russia would adapt. That framing is wrong. It has always been wrong, because the doctrinal collapse of the Black Sea Fleet is not a series of incidents. It is a single continuous 4-year sequence of the same hidden military variable being exploited again and again, and Russia has never solved it. What is the hidden variable? Let me be very direct because I have spent decades studying how armies and navies move. The hidden variable is asymmetric maritime denial through distributed unmanned systems integrated with long-range precision fires. In plain English, Ukraine figured out that you do not need a navy to defeat a navy. You need cheap, expendable, semi-autonomous platforms that can be produced at industrial scale, paired with deep strike weapons that range every port the enemy might retreat to. Once you have that, the geographic depth that classical naval doctrine treats as safety becomes a liability. Every additional mile a Russian warship retreats from Sevastopol is another mile farther from its mission, another mile longer its supply line, and another mile of coastline it must surveil against unmanned threats it cannot reliably detect. That is the doctrinal failure, not equipment, not training, not even leadership in the narrow sense. The doctrinal failure is that Russia is still fighting a 20th century surface fleet war against a 21st century distributed denial campaign, and refusing to admit the war has changed. Now pull the lens back further because the consequences of that failure are no longer naval. They are industrial. They are economic. They are state level. And this is where casual news consumers stop paying attention and serious observers should lean in. When the Moskva went down in 2022, the cost to Russia was roughly $750 million in hull and weapons, plus the symbolic damage. When the Admiral Essen is hit at Novorossiysk in May of 2026, for the 4th time, by the way, this is not the first strike on her. The cost is no longer just the frigate. The cost is the Shishkari's oil terminal that suspended loadings the same week. The cost is roughly 1.2 million tons of oil products at the Grushovaya Balka storage facility, the largest in the Caucasus, sitting under threat. The cost is the insurance premiums for every tanker calling at a Russian Black Sea port, which have risen to levels that make seaborne Russian crude exports through this corridor commercially marginal. The cost is the budget line item for replacing combat ships in a defense industry that, under sanctions, cannot source the German MTU diesel engines or the Ukrainian-built gas turbines that the Admiral Grigorovich-class frigates were originally designed around. Let me put a number on that because numbers cut through. The Admiral Makarov, the Admiral Essen, and the Admiral Grigorovich, the 3 sisters of the Admiral Grigorovich class operating in the Black Sea, were originally part of a planned 6-ship class. The final 3 were canceled because after 2014, Ukraine stopped supplying Russia with the Zoraya Mashpek turbines required to build them. Russia has been trying to substitute domestically produced engines for nearly a decade. It has not succeeded at production scale, which means every frigate Ukraine damages or destroys in the Black Sea cannot be replaced like for like, not this year, not in this decade, Possibly not in this generation of Russian shipbuilding. This matters enormously because it converts a tactical strike into a permanent capability reduction. The Russian Navy is not losing ships it can rebuild. It is losing ships from a class that was already a closed book. And it gets even more serious from here because the operational picture compounds. With Sevastopol untenable as a forward base, with Crimea's air defenses degraded by sustained ATACMS and Storm Shadow strikes, with the Kerch Bridge repeatedly hit and structurally compromised, and with Novorossiysk now under regular drone attack, Russia has lost what military planners call freedom of action. Freedom of action is the ability to choose when and where to operate. It is the most precious commodity any fleet possesses, and it is the first thing that disappears when an adversary establishes effective denial. The Black Sea Fleet today cannot freely sortie surface combatants into the western Black Sea. It cannot reliably resupply Crimea by sea. It cannot conduct the Kaliber missile launches from its surface platforms with the freedom it once enjoyed. Those launches are now largely shifted to submarines operating cautiously and to land-based systems in occupied territory. The fleet has been reduced in functional terms from an offensive instrument of state power to a coastal defense force defending its own last base. This is the moment in any military analysis where the prosecutorial verdict becomes unavoidable. So let me deliver it cleanly. The Russian Black Sea Fleet as a strategic instrument has been defeated, not destroyed, defeated. Those are different words. A defeated fleet still has ships. A defeated fleet still has personnel. A defeated fleet still flies its flag. But a defeated fleet can no longer perform the missions for which it exists. By that standard, the only standard that matters in naval warfare, the Black Sea Fleet has failed. And the May 23rd strike on the Admiral Essen and the Project 1239 hovercraft at Novorossiysk is not the cause of that failure. It is the proof of it. Now I want to walk you through the climactic operational picture because the night of May 23rd into May 24th was not a single strike. It was a hybrid swarm, and the architecture of that swarm tells you everything about where modern naval warfare is going. Ukrainian unmanned systems forces deployed Magura-class uncrewed surface vessels, almost certainly mixing V-5 boats configured as expendable strike platforms with V-7-class drones armed for self-defense against aerial threats. These were paired with long-range one-way attack aerial drones, the AN-196 Ludi-class and variants, launched from Ukrainian territory hundreds of kilometers away. The aerial drones forced Russian air defense systems, the Pantsers, the Tor batteries, the close-in weapon systems on the warships themselves to commit. Radars lit up, missiles fired, ammunition expended. And while those defenses were saturated and looking up, the surface drones came in low on the water from a direction the defenders did not adequately cover. This is doctrine. This is mature doctrine. This is the same operational logic the United States Navy spent the better part of the 2010s wargaming against Chinese A2/AD concepts in the Pacific, except Ukraine, a country that did not have a navy in any meaningful sense 4 years ago, is now executing it against Russia at industrial scale. The Magura program has been disclosed to have destroyed or damaged at least 17 Russian naval and aviation targets. The V-7 variant has shot down 2 Russian Su-30 strike fighters using AIM-9 Sidewinder missiles mounted on a sea drone, an event that before this war was treated in every naval academy in the world as theoretical. The U.S. Navy is now testing the Magura V-7 at the Balikatan exercises in the Philippines. Let that sink in. American forces in the Pacific are now training with a weapon system designed by the country Russia was supposed to defeat in 3 days. The broader lesson here, and I want to be very clear about this because it is the entire reason this analysis matters beyond the Black Sea, is that we are watching the birth of a new naval paradigm. The classical surface fleet, large, expensive, manned, centralized, is being outfought by a distributed, unmanned, expendable system that costs roughly 1/1000th as much per platform. This is not a Ukrainian story. This is a global story. Every navy on Earth, the United States Navy, the Royal Navy, the French Navy, the Chinese Navy, the Indian Navy, the Turkish Navy, is, as of tonight, having internal meetings about what Novorossiysk means for their own assumptions. And the honest answer is that the assumptions are in trouble. So when I tell you that Putin's naval command is paralyzed, I am not using a rhetorical flourish. I am describing a specific operational condition. A paralyzed command is one that cannot generate options at the speed events require. The Black Sea Fleet Command, by every visible indicator, is in that condition. It cannot defend Novorossiysk reliably. It cannot return to Sevastopol. It cannot replace its hulls. It cannot retrain its doctrine fast enough. It cannot publicly acknowledge losses without political cost, and it cannot conceal them because satellite imagery and Ukrainian drone footage circulate before the morning briefings are even drafted. Every option it considers is worse than the option it considered yesterday. That is paralysis. That is the technical definition. And here is the historical judgment. Navies do not recover quickly from this kind of defeat. The Russian Imperial Navy after Tsushima in 1905 did not recover for a generation. The Italian Navy after Taranto in 1940 never recovered its offensive confidence. The French Navy after Mers el-Kebir in 1940 carried that wound through the rest of the war. The Argentine Navy after the loss of the General Belgrano in 1982 has not put a major surface combatant to sea in a contested environment in over 40 years. Fleets that lose their freedom of action lose something psychological that cannot be replaced by hulls. They lose the willingness to fight at sea. And once that is gone, the war at sea is over, even if the ships are still afloat. History will record that the war for the Black Sea was decided not by a great fleet action, not by a Trafalgar or a Midway, but by a 4-year campaign of attritional denial waged by a country that did not have a navy against a country that thought it did. History will record that the Moskva in April 2022 was the opening shot, and the Admiral Essen at Novorossiysk in May 2026 was the verdict. And history will record that the Russian Naval Command, given 4 years and unlimited resources to adapt, did not adapt because the doctrine that built it could not allow it to admit what the war was actually about. Now here's what I want you to watch for in the coming weeks, because this story is not closing. It is escalating. Watch the insurance markets for Black Sea shipping. Watch the export tonnage moving through Novorossiysk and Tuapse. Watch for any attempt by the Russian Navy to redeploy assets from the Northern Fleet or the Caspian Flotilla to reinforce a position that cannot be reinforced through the Bosphorus under the Montreux Convention. Watch for political movement inside Moscow about who carries the blame for a fleet that cannot defend its own pier. And watch above all for the moment Ukrainian forces demonstrate that the Magura platform can range beyond the Black Sea, into the Sea of Azov in a final clearance operation, or into the Mediterranean against the remnants of the Russian Mediterranean squadron now operating out of Tartus with reduced support. Because that is the next chapter, and what happens next changes everything we thought we knew about how navies will be built, fought, and lost for the next 50 years. I want to leave you with one final thought before I close. The job of a serious military analyst is not to celebrate. The job is to tell you what is true, what it means, and what comes next. What is true is that Russia's Black Sea Fleet has been operationally defeated by a country that, in 2022, was not credited with the ability to do so. What it means is that the entire global naval order is now in a period of doctrinal reassessment that will last a decade. What comes next is the question of whether the lessons of the Black Sea are absorbed by other navies in time, or whether other commanders in other oceans will repeat the assumption that distance, mass, and tradition equal safety. They do not. The Admiral Essen burning at her pier in Novorossiysk is the proof. If you want to keep following this analysis as the story develops, and it is developing every week now, please subscribe to the channel. We are working toward a community of serious viewers who want strategic interpretation, not headline noise, and every subscription brings us closer to the goal of building this channel into the place where you come first when something on the battlefield actually matters. I read every comment. I plan future analyses around the questions you raise. So stay with this channel because the questions raised tonight do not have simple answers, and the next chapter of this war is being written faster than the headlines can track it. I am Ben Hodges. The fleet has been defeated. The command is paralyzed, and the doctrine that built them both is, as of this moment, finished. We will be watching what comes next together.